Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jackie Davis, and I will have the privilege of moderating all our discussions today. We heard there those stark figures, and Emma said, no time to waste. The video asked the question, are we ready for the challenge ahead? Why is Europe losing ground? What are those obstacles, the barriers that need to be addressed? How can policy in key areas, Marcus said earlier, we have to tick all the boxes in those key areas, from digitalization and better regulation to energy and trade. We're going to have panels delving into what needs to be done in all of those areas, and crucially, how public investment can help to plug the gaps in the landscape and to foster that private sector investment that will drive the future. And all of this, as Marcus said, so closely linked to our overarching theme last year of industrial competitiveness. We're going to do this through a series of panels with European commissioners and a host of distinguished speakers, and we're going to have keynote speeches. Emma already mentioned European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker this morning, and from the European Parliament President Martin Schulz at the start of the afternoon. But we're going to kick off, as you already indicated, by hearing from business. We want to set the context for our discussion by hearing how they see the world, how leaders, captains of industry see the situation now and the challenges ahead. So in this first debate, which we've simply called the investment climate in Europe, we're going to discuss just that. What are our assets and advantages? Why are we losing ground? What do we need to do about it? Let me bring our speakers up on stage, and please do come and join me as I introduce you. Ingo Kramer, who is president of BDA, the Confederation of German Employers Associations, and managing partner of J.H.K. Group, and he's also a vice president of Business Europe. Great to have you with us, Mr. Kramer. Pierre Gattaz, president of MEDEF, the French Business Confederation, and chairman of the board of Radiall. He also is a vice president of Business Europe. Great to have you here too. And Professor Dr. Stephan Reimelt, President and CEO of GE Europe. A very warm welcome to all of you. And the way this is going to work, ladies and gentlemen, I've asked our panel not to make opening remarks. We're going to dive straight in. I have a few questions for them just to get us started, and then I will be coming among you with the microphone for your questions, but also your comments. We have a lot of expertise in this room. We'd like to hear from you as well. So let's get started straight away, gentlemen. And if I could just dive in, we heard that figure. Europe has seen investment as a share of its GDP. It's fallen to its lowest level in 20 years in the wake of the crisis. Some other parts of the world also saw sharp falls, but they're recovering more quickly. What do you see as the most important issues we're going to need to address to get the investment climate right so we can begin to reverse that trend and catch up with those who've recovered faster than us? Mr. Kramer.
Of course, it is in the first step a question of the different kind of business you are doing. But in any case, what you need is good contact to your customers. So that means in all cases very good infrastructure to get into this contact. The next important point is you need very good skilled workers. It's a question of education in the different countries of Europe. Then you need a good cost structure. Very important on this point is energy costs. Mm-hmm. Europe, especially Germany, but the whole area of Europe has much higher costs than especially the United States now. And of course, we need more reforms and less regulations to be able to work and not to discuss with bureaucracy and all these things.
So a whole host of issues that need to be tackled together. I want to come back on all of those in our discussion, but Pierre Gattaz, from your perspective, anything you would add? How do you see the challenge now? Why are we struggling to catch up when others have recovered so much faster in terms of investment levels?
Yes, in terms of investments, I think that you have three components. You have the investments from the companies themselves. You have the investments from households, and you got the third component, which is investments from public sectors. So to boost the two first, you need to decrease the tax pressure. Tax pressure on companies on one side, tax pressure on households on the other side. And that means that you need to decrease the public expenses altogether, of France, of course, but of Europe altogether. So this is a keystone to restore margin, competitive margin to companies in order that they can invest again. So that's the first thing. Then restore procurement, purchase power for households. So by decreasing the tax pressure and with less technocracy, less bureaucracy, less civil sergeants, this is very, very important. And then be sure that when you drop the public expenses, you take care of saving the real and strategic infrastructures of the countries, such as infrastructure for energy, smart grids, for telecommunication, for digital, for water, for transportation. But the fact is that we have to be very careful because we have to drop and decrease the public expenditures by protecting the strategic infrastructure. This is what we do in our companies. When you have a crisis in our companies, you protect two things. You protect the R&D, first of all, and you protect the investments. So Europe as a whole and some specific countries such as France on the other side need to decrease drastically their public expenses by investing in their infrastructures on the other side.
Okay. Yeah, so when you cut, be very smart in the way that you cut and focus on the smart growth, the areas that will deliver for the future.
It's exactly that. You have to do lean management. You have to make operational excellence in the public expenses. You have to decrease, to do management, to work out your process in order that your public expenses are much more efficient. On one side, so decrease the cost and put more efficiency, better quality with less, and then on the other side, invest on very strategic infrastructure, which is in fact the idea of building the future.
Yeah, we'll come back on all those issues and how you select, and that comes to this question, which we'll discuss, I hope now, but also in the final panel of the role of public investment and where it's needed and how it can trigger your investment. But in terms of that broad investment climate, Stephan Reimelt, how do you see the challenges ahead?
Well, let me maybe add, we are investing heavily into Europe. One of our largest investment historically we do presently in Europe. So we have reasons why we invest. And let me maybe add, nice movie. If this movie would have been shown in America to invest in the States, you would have not seen a single but. And I think that's typically for Europe. We don't talk enough about the good story, what we have achieved and what has been done. We raise too many concerns. But I understand this is in this environment here in Brussels because we have to help the politicians to wake up. And let me add something. When we look into investment, let's look very clearly at the investment matrix. Why are you investing? Tax, employment, brain power, innovation are the drivers. Is the EU responsible for that? No, let's be very fair and let's be realistic. It's the national governments. So if you negotiate, you don't negotiate with Europe, you negotiate with local governments. So do we sit at the right spot here? Well, when we invest, we don't talk enough to Europe. So we would promote very much to see more Europe, but as you rightly said, a more leaner Europe. And I don't want to talk about regulations because that is a typical theme that we bash on regulations. Yes, we need regulations in Europe. Yes, we need to protect certain things because Europe is in an integration process where you have to protect certain things. But having said that, these regulations need to be predictable. They need to be transparent. They need to have a certain longevity and they need to be sustainable. So having said that, I think we have to improve in Europe one thing, and I'm pardoned that I'm being a little bit outspoken, but the say-do ratio out of Europe is pretty low. And having said that, I think, we have to be more effective in implementing certain things. And as we all know from an economical point, there's enough liquidity there, to do major investments. But there's not enough credibility here. And I think we have to work on credibility and not, on improvements and certain things. I think, that's a major point.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Kramer, I'll come back on this crucial question of how you take decisions on where to invest. Because, as you said, there's a lot of say in Brussels. We'll come back to whether there's enough do or not. But policymakers really need to understand where you are all coming from. So when you are deciding as a company where to put your investments, What are the key factors that drive that?
For me, in my business, the most important point is to be close to the customers. Next question is, with possible low costs I have to produce there. And all the other points are standing behind this, but that's a question for my business. So that depends on the different kinds of business. If the most important point for you is to produce something which is very difficult with the environment questions, then you need good organization of how to handle the regulations. So that is really a question of your special kind of business. But I think all of the investors are asking for low costs, low energy costs, low taxes. These are all over the world the same questions. But as Professor Reimelt told us, this is a question which has to be organized by the government, not by the EU. The EU has to give a framework which is not too difficult. Yes, of course, we need regulations, but transparent ones. Please give the governments in our countries the possibility to be competitive to the whole world. So we have to strengthen our best points, and they are different in the different countries in Europe. So regulations, yes, of course, but transparent and not too difficult, not too much bureaucracy. And then sometimes when the politicians ask me, what can we do for you? Sometimes I like to say, please let us work on our own. Please do some years nothing. Sometimes that's the best for us. Please, please let us work. That is most important. Then, because what you are doing is to stop us working.
Okay, so two elements here. Less saying, more doing in the areas where you need to do something, if I can paraphrase that, but also question, do we need to do it at all in some areas? So presumably you would very much welcome Jean-Claude Juncker's pledge, promise, that the Commission will be big and more ambitious on the bigger things and smaller and more modest on the small things. Question is, what are the big things, and are they focusing on the right things? But perhaps we could come back to that. Mr. Gattaz, the same question to you about this decision on where to invest, because you also, of course, investing in China and so on. How do you decide now where to put the money?
Three layers of decision. First decision, is the continent or the country business friendly? Is there any market, any customers? And this is where the investments of Mr. Juncker can be very much of interest, of course, because you create growth, you create a market for the suppliers, for the people, for the companies. Second layer is that a production friendly country? That means if I have only to put sales engineers or sales agents, or should I put sales agents plus a production facilities, which imply I look at the cost of energy, cost of infrastructure, easiness of doing business, cost of tax, of course. So that's the second layer. Third layer is the innovation. Is it an R&D friendly country or continent? And in that case, you have a tax system which can be very interesting. You have the relationship with universities, with research centers, with the ecosystems. And you see the three layers. So if it's not R&D friendly and not production friendly, you can only have sales jobs, and this is it. So if you go deeper in the interest of the country or the continent, you can create much more jobs with production jobs and R&D jobs.
So very, very clear calculation that you have to make each time. Those are the factors. We'll come back through the day on how you address those points.
And this is why it's so important that the Mr. Juncker investment is, can eat at the three layers. It can eat at the first layer, which is bring more business and more growth for the companies in Europe. It can bring investment on infrastructures, which are very important for the two other layers, which means transportation, easiness of logistics and so on, if you want to develop the business locally with production facilities. And it can develop, of course, energy infrastructures and digital digital and telecommunication infrastructures in order to help you to be quicker and faster in this world where, in fact, Europe can have all this place, of course, and be the future big continent regarding all what the future we have to create.
Dr. Reimelt, same question really to you, but if I can also move us on a little bit, in terms of, Marcus mentioned right at the beginning that link between the investment climate and the overall question of our competitiveness and how strongly they are linked. Is one of the keys to doing the right things and focusing on the right things, putting competitiveness at the center of all of this? Is that what you think drives getting the climate right, or would you put the emphasis somewhere else? The same question to all of you.
Yeah, I think you're fully right. I mean, competitive is definitely a core point. But let me explain a little bit, because we are an investor. Since 2000, 60% of all the global investment we did in Europe. And like I said, I mean, there's good reasons why. And one of the major reasons is because we find technology, we find brain power, and we find innovation here which helps us to take local products and export them. And that's the strength. And having said that, I think there's one thing very important. Just assume for a moment that you're Chinese or even an American and you would like to invest in Europe. At first, we have to recognize that there is no Europe. Because where do you go for Europe? Europe has a huge strength which needs to be explained, which is diversity. We as a company, we like diversity, we live diversity. But Europe's strength is diversity. It's so fragmented that, you know, there is not one place to go. There is not one infrastructure. Sorry to say, I mean, we're battling every infrastructure. If it's the energy infrastructure, the oil and gas infrastructure, or whatever, it's not there. So we're working on that. So having said that, I think, you know, we need to explain Europe, and that's a job which should be done here. I think we can do a little bit better. And then we have to explain where the strengths are. We as a company, being 130 years in Europe, very actively, we understand the tricks and the trade in order to pick up these opportunities which we see, so to speak, the jewel, the diversity, the fragmentation, and we can live with this fragmentation. But for investors, that's very difficult. Where to invest in Europe? Where do you go? Do you go to Bayern or you go to Barcelona? You know, can you make this decision here? Do you find people who can help you here? Very difficult, sorry to say. So let me explain that. I think, you know, Europe has to shape the message a little bit clearer and has to bring out the good points in order to make clear statements why to invest. Being close to the clients, I'm sorry to say, but we saw, you know, if you want to be close to the future clients, you have to be in China, not in Europe.
Because that's where the growth is. That figure, 90% of the growth.
So, you know, work on the messaging.
Can I just ask, because you're really echoing when you talk about the diversity, and you talked, Mr. Kramer, about playing to your strengths being crucial. There's a difficult balancing act, isn't there? Because the benefits of a single market, of having over 500 million consumers, that is our great asset, that's our great strength. But you're both emphasizing the diversity, the different strengths are also important. How do we resolve that tension when you're sitting here in Brussels and looking at it and focusing on plugging the gaps in the single market? Do we perhaps sometimes forget, do you think policymakers forget the diversity point as well?
Of course, Europe is a single market, but with totally different, separate small markets. As we got from Mr. Reimelt, we have one Europe, but not one kind of people, one kind of culture in Europe. And it is not realistic to expect that this will change in a short time, because that's the culture we got over hundreds of years. So what we have to do, in my opinion, is to make this difference to a strength, to try to force the advantages of this kind of difference in our single market, because there is no other chance. We can't organize a whole Europe with one culture in 5 or 10 years. So let's make the best of this. And the question to invest in Bavarian or Barcelona, that might be a question of language, of different skilled workers, of taxes. We can organize to keep the tax system together. We can organize to keep the regulations together, not different regulations. But after all this, we have to look for the advantages, what is helpful to go in the Spanish market, for example, if you want to export to Latin America. What is the advantage to go to Bavarian because of the high technology skilled universities there? The advantage for France, the area of Paris, for example, where it's a very strong area where you can get lots of different companies with headquarters in a short area. So we have different advantages in different countries in Europe. And because of the reason we can't get the same culture, we should strengthen the difference of Germany and make the best of it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gattaz, just a question linked to that in relation to the importance of the single market and where we need to put the focus to get those benefits. But also, if I could come back to something you said when you talked about particularly looking how R&D friendly a country is. We talk about, the Commission talks about, innovation is at the heart of everything. It's very easy to say, we must be more innovative, we must be more like the Americans, we must not be so risk averse, but it is not so easy to do. What for you is the key at the European level? You talked about some of the things you look for when deciding where in Europe to go. What for you is the key to making this a framework that really does foster innovation? Then I will be coming out to all of you. Just a thought on innovation from all of you, and then...
Well, I think, well, strategically for Europe, we should have a vision of Europe, winning Europe 2020 or 2030, a common vision that we should share of Europe. Then we should have values, common values about the importance of jobs creation, of human being, of course, of the companies, which are so important. It used to be a time where Europe were working hard on the consumer without taking care of the jobs, destruction. So everything was fine for consumers all day long. So I'm very happy that now we are less concentrating on consumer, we are more concentrating on job creation and on companies. So that's a very big move, because if we want people to consume, they should have a job first. And who provide the jobs? The companies. So my vision of Europe is really much to do two things, is to attract companies and be sure that they are going to develop in Europe. We need two things. We need competitiveness of the country, of the continent. That means very much being careful about the tax pressure and cost labor pressure. So these are two elements which are very important in France, as you know. So we are fighting all day long about decreasing the pressure, because this is a key element to be competitive, to restore margin, and at the end of the day, to innovate, to create jobs, to develop. And then on the other side, you have the trust environment. Trust is very important. That means there are three components of the trust. First is social laws, which are predictable, which are simple. It's very complicated to hire people, or if it is very complicated to lay off people, people will not invest in Europe. They will invest somewhere else. So social regulation must be very lean and mean and simplified. Then second thing is tax. Tax must be visible, simple, the tax regulation, predictable. You know, it cannot change all the time. So if you want to invest in a plant with 30 years of age, you have to be sure about your investment, and you have to be sure about your return on investments. If you have a tax system which moves all day long, you are not going to invest in Europe. So the second thing is really stability and visibility of the tax regulation. Third thing is the complexity of the environment. I mean, it's crazy, because when I look and how the administration is moving ahead alone, putting into rules, regulation, reglementation, legislation, text, and I say it's absolutely crazy. So I'm dreaming of what you have done in UK. One in, two out. Every time you create one text of law, you destroy two, you suppress. I'm dreaming about civil surgeons who are there, 10% of them, 15% of them, who are suppressing legislation, regulation. I'm dreaming about laws which could have an end. That means you have 5 years, and this is it. It's dropped automatically, as in Canada. In order that we are very careful about not having a bureaucracy, a technocracy, an administration, we are so complicated that you are afraid of putting your business in Europe.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just thinking about the example of Switzerland. They have a labor code with 60 pages only. In Germany, I think it's 700 pages.
Maybe.
In France,
or more.
in France, it's 3,500 pages.
Wow.
So you see, and so when I look at that, I say, oh my God, and there's only 3% of unemployment ratio in Switzerland. So this is what I'm saying. If we want to invest, and if I'm asking for something in Europe, we have to have a big convergence of those three topics.
Okay.
Social, tax, and the rest of,
We'll
and we should converge.
Okay, we'll have a chance to discuss all of that with Commission First Vice President Timmermans later when we talk about the better regulation agenda, and I will put those points to him and see your 1 in, 2 out rule, your sunset clause, see what he says. But Dr. Reimelt, you wanted to come in on this, and this question, I just want to say, Europe was a big leader in innovation. We're going to talk later about digital technologies. We were the world leader. Again, we're losing ground. How do we make sure we stay innovative? And how do we keep innovative startups in Europe? Or do you disagree? You're shaking your head.
No, I don't disagree. I fully disagree. We don't lose ground. We miss the boat. And I think we are at the moment in such a good situation. Economy in Germany runs well, and in some of the other member states is pretty good. We are missing the boat. The industrial internet, which is coming at the moment, as you would call it, industrial 4.0, unfortunately, it's not invented in Europe. And we're not only, behind, we also are looking at the wrong way forward. And let me make one statement. We have to understand that one thing globally happened is the speed of innovation has changed so dramatically that it's nice to talk today while other ones have tomorrow the solution. And at the moment we are discussing if we're having, a European solution for digitalization and a European internet. It's all history. It's all history. Technology moves on. It's global, and it's there. And so when we're looking at it, we as GE, have invested at the moment, in over 1,000 software engineers in the Silicon Valley, because that's where the music is. Europe is too fragmented. Yes, we have a startup scene. I've been yesterday in Berlin. Yes, Berlin is a startup scene. Maybe Paris a little bit, maybe Stockholm, maybe London. But there is not real one center of gravity. And if you don't have that, you can't attract investment. And innovation needs venture capital. Where is venture capital? Yes, when I talk to the German government, we have the same amount of patents, 16,000 patents per year in Baden-Württemberg. And we have 16,000 patents in Silicon Valley. But guess what? We have 200 million of venture capital and 200 billion of venture capital. So what are we talking?
So we need a European Silicon Valley, and if we do,
yes, we do.
How do we do it? How do we
but
pick
not by instructing it.
Exactly.
So this is over. Innovation moves, and the speed of innovation is so fast that regulation is always too slow. Let's take one thing. We talked about a market. I'm very surprised when you talk about a market so easily. In many markets in Europe, there is no market. Let's take at the moment when I'm looking out of my window in Brussels office, I see a big picture, and it's called Towards Energy Union. Well, I don't know where that happens and when that happens, but I can tell you, in the countries I know in Europe, there's not even in the national countries one Energiewende or one. There's no market. It's all regulated. The energy market is a regulated market.
Again, we're going to come back on that issue later on. But if we are not, as you say, it's not that we're losing ground, we are missing the boat. What's the advice to policymakers? Because you say we need these things, but you can't create it artificially. So what can they do? Mr. Kramer, do you think to encourage and drive innovation? You said earlier about, please, there are some things, just let us be. Let us do our job. What is the most important thing they need to do to enable that innovation and that speed of innovation that we need now? And then I'm going to come out to all of you.
What we just got with the example of Silicon Valley is the United States put all the power they have together in one place. They take how many billions of venture capital together and to force a special situation. Even in this place, in this situation, we are very separated in Europe. And of course, the Europeans are not in the same situation that they spend a lot of risk money than the American people are doing. So there's a difference of culture. Perhaps at this point, the difference of culture is one of the biggest missing link we have. To change this culture, to be riskful, to spend a lot of money in one point, that's not very typical for Germany and not very typical for Europe. I have no idea how to change the situation very fast.
You anticipated my next question.
I would like to change it very fast, but I have no idea how to do it.
The interesting question is that we share with North America values.
Yeah.
These are all the same values. And at the same time, we are all sitting here, and we have one fundamental problem, that we missed the boat on TTIP. And not one of us is really getting up, yes, most of you do, because I'm preaching to the converted. TTIP at the moment in the country where I'm coming from is totally negative. And we all know at the same time, if we don't do that, we don't get the spirit, the optimism, maybe the little bit different culture, surprisingly by all having the same values, we don't get that spirit. And we need it maybe. And what are we doing for TTIP?
I'm a little bit more optimistic in TTIP than Mr. Reimelt is. The situation, especially during the last 2 years, was as you explained us. But in the moment, I have the idea, the feeling that the government got this point, and they try to force now the negotiations about TTIP. And I'm quite optimistic that we will finish this discussion this year between the European Union and the United States. And of course, I hope so.
We will hear later on.
Perhaps my hope is a part of the optimistic.
Sure. We will hear from the Trade Commissioner, Cecilia Malmström, later on, and we'll find out if she shares your optimism. But let me see, are there any questions to our panels or indeed comments to what you have heard? Does anybody want to join in our discussion at this point? Or are you enjoying me grilling our speakers? And if you could introduce yourself, and please be brief, because I'm hoping lots of hands will come up. Thank you.
Henryka Bochniarz, President of the Confederation of Leviathan from Poland. And I have a question to Stephan, actually, because you mentioned that you are looking for that kind of a European messaging. Is the idea of the Juncker's Fund and the list of projects, you know, that kind of answer you are looking for?
Okay, I'll just see if there are any more before we come back. Anybody else want to? Okay, and can I add to that question while we're on the subject of the Juncker plan? More broadly, I'd like to ask all three of you how you see the role of public investment. What role you indicated earlier, focus on infrastructure and so on, but the Commission is hoping that the money it puts up, the European Investment Bank put up, 21 billion, will generate 315 billion euro of investment, and the private sector obviously carrying the load there. And we'll talk about this in the last panel, but what does the Commission need to do with this plan to make sure that the private sector will be convinced to play its part? Just a thought on that, if you would. So please pick up on that question, but I wanted to just broaden. How do you see the role of public investment, and how can industry be convinced to play its part? Dr. Reimelt first.
At first, as we discussed already, it's credibility. You invest only if this is sustainable, transparent, and have longevity. The 350 billion are very interesting. The key thing is, where are the priorities? In which project this money goes? And I think if we in Europe setting priorities, for example, in an energy infrastructure, in my opinion, at the moment, the hardest theme we have in Europe, then I would say, yes, wisely spent, and that helps. Because if it goes in all the projects which in the last couple of years or in the decade were just, so to speak, you know, on the surface and there was no money, and now they're coming up, and they're not being very selectively and very aggressively looked at, this thing will disappear. So priorities, explain why you do, looking at a strong leverage. We hear the leverage of 15, unbelievable. I would say, okay, say-do ratio, let's look into this, and do attractive projects. And I'm fully supporting that private investors have to come. Private investors need predictability, and then they will come. And they will come on the right priority set. I don't see the priorities yet.
So we come back to those core words, credibility, predictability every time. And Monsieur Gattaz, in terms of how you see more broadly the role of public investment, where it should be focused and where it shouldn't be, going back to your what you should do and what you shouldn't, how can it best be used? And do you believe that from what you know of the Juncker plan, that the private sector will play that part, that huge part that is envisaged for them? What's going to make them do it?
Well, I think the first is to define priorities of investment, sure. For me, the two elements are job creation and growth for Europe. So I come back to all the logic of basic infrastructures that we need, or strategic infrastructure. So that's the first point, is the choice of strategic infrastructure. Second thing is the return on investment, of course, and financial profitability. And if we want to attract private financing sector, we absolutely have to be sure that there will be a return, a profitability, a measurement of the process, which give feedback and return. And third topic is, of course, those investments have to benefit from the ecosystems, medium-sized companies and small-sized companies. And in order that we can create, again, growth and market for those very small companies. So take care of the ecosystems, European ecosystems. These are the three dimensions I will see.
I'll give you a chance to come back in, but first, Mr. Kramer, in terms of how you see the role of public investment and this plan in particular.
Priority means that this big sum which could be invested in infrastructure, so it's very important that you don't put in any place a little bit. In Germany, we have an expression that means with a Gießkanne. I don't know how to explain this in English. That means everywhere a little bit of money. That wouldn't help anything. Sorry?
Don't spread it so thinly.
Such a big sum of money has to be invested in the key points. And if you do this, then you can change situations, perhaps not like Silicon Valley, but in that direction. I'm coming from a harbor town at the North Sea, and it's very easy. First, you have to build a harbor. That's an infrastructure which has to be invested by the government, and then you can get the ships. So, if you invest such a big amount of money in the right point, then you get the business in the next step. But we have to discuss not how much money in which place, here a little bit, there a little bit, but which should be the most important point, perhaps the energy industry. I can agree, of course. Perhaps some points of infrastructure to get the logistic better than we have today. But please don't put the money, as we sometimes do in Europe, everywhere a little bit.
A little bit everywhere. So perhaps that focus, listening to the sort of issues you've all mentioned, and you can't have a harbour without ships without a harbour, is interconnectivity, whether it be transport, energy, grids and infrastructure, whether it be broadband, IT. Connectivity for you is sort of one of the key areas to tackle. I think you wanted to come back on a point?
Let me address one point. I think we have to be also fair by looking, when we invest and when we are now looking in front of this huge investment pool, the biggest driver in our very volatile market, which we have, and that will remain, by the way, we will live in a market of slow growth and high volatility. But the biggest driver of volatility is the regulator themselves. And that's the problem. So let's face that a little bit, you know. So here you sit as politicians and you are scaring sometimes because, you know, the volatility we face through the global economy already, you know, is, you know, amplified.
Why? Because you think that the policymakers sort of jump on that volatility and start making policy in a hurry? What is the reason why they're the cause of that volatility?
Well, just let's take the oil price.
Yeah.
You know, just simply, I mean, at first nobody knows where the oil price will develop to. But the impact immediately is so big that when we talk about e-mobility, we have to face that in Europe at the moment, gasoline consumption has increased by 4%. So when we talk about, you know, in some of the energy markets, you know, where I'm coming from, CO2 has increased because we are trying to bring a regime into the marketplace through regulation which helps to reduce CO2, and in 2013 we increased CO2 by plugging in 24 billion euro into an energy market regime which doesn't really resolve the problem. So I think we have to also, and that's the problem, when we do something we have to learn to gauge, show accountability. We did a study, for example, as GE, just in the last couple of months on when does the Energiewende, the energy transition, is paying back. And it's very amazing. So the payback time, you know, you have to make sure that what you spend, you get a return. And spending alone is not good enough. You have to make sure that what you spend, where's the result and where's the impact? You're being paid for impact. You're not being paid for spending. And I think we sometimes miss that.
Okay, so we need, and you've all said the word predictability several times already, we need, given the volatility of the outside world, if you like, greater predictability, a calmer, more sober approach, if you like, to the policy-making side, not to be responding that way. I want to come back on the question of skills, because you all mentioned it in your opening remarks and when you talked about where you invest. But before I do that, anybody want to join in with a question or comment at all at this point? No? Okay. Sorry, didn't see you there. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, and please introduce yourself. Thank you.
So, Adrian Vandenhoven, I'm the Director General of the Generic and Biosimilar Medicines Association. Mr. Gattaz, you talked about predictability with respect to governments, how governments could be more predictable in their area. One area of increased spending for sure in Europe is going to be on healthcare because of the aging population. For medicines, it's utterly predictable what is going to happen in Europe. The overall volume consumption of medicines is going to increase by 20%. And there are going to be a lot of very good new medicines, patent-protected medicines, if you wish, in the area of oncology, of cancer treatment, for example. This is utterly predictable. Everyone knows exactly that this is going to happen. Yet governments, for instance, in your country, they have a crisis every single year because they don't know how to pay for the medicines, because they haven't predicted this increase in the volume, which doesn't mean a 20% increase in price, but an increase in volume. And they haven't predicted that new medicines are coming for very specialized disease areas but are very important. So how do we get governments to look, I would say not long-term, medium-term?
Okay, I'll just see if there are any more before we come back on that. Okay, I see one. Could you just pick that one up, please? Thank you, just to save time. Thanks very much.
Susanna.
It should come on as you speak.
Okay, Susanna Hahn from European Issuers, representing quoted companies. I understand GE has done some work in the past on middle market companies and access to growth. And I just wondered if you wanted to comment any further on how to encourage companies to go to venture capital, to public markets, etc. We've just done some work on IPOs in Europe. And I think one of our perspectives is that actually for smaller quoted companies, the public markets equity investment is very expensive. So are the public markets too expensive for European companies?
Okay, thank you very much. Any others before we come back? Okay, let's pick up on those 2 points first. Monsieur Gattaz, the first question was to you.
I think you're absolutely right, sir. The politics, administrations should listen to companies, to business people, because they have a vision and they know where to go. When you have people who are disconnected from the business and from innovation without any vision, you come back to address problems with very short-term solutions and very politician solutions, which is not give long-term solutions. So I fully agree. We should have a vision on health evolution, on the technologies evolution, in science, in biotech, with digital revolution in order to integrate all what can bring innovation and research to the fact that we are going to expand more and more in terms of health. And the solution will be in the companies, in the business, in innovation, in research. So this is a basic point, and the fact is we should absolutely, and this is true for France, for all countries, and for Europe. I mean, we have most of all the solution in our hands. This is true for climate. This is true for energy. This is true for health. So as you say, you know, we are discovering plenty of things. So we should be very strong at addressing those problems with business solutions, with research, and that creates jobs, and that creates differentiations with the other people, with Chinese, Taiwanese, and all our competitors.
Okay.
So we address things where the solutions are here. So I fully agree we should have long-term strategy and vision on those subjects.
Thank you.
I have to make a comment here. I can't agree. Sorry. Great questions, but we have a major problem. The biggest healthcare will change fundamentally, globally. The healthcare system presently we have in Europe is unaffordable. So we have to go to value healthcare, value creation. And I can tell you today, when you buy a watch from Apple, they're generating more health data in a month than what we have here on health data. The next biggest, healthcare company based on data going to be Apple. Sorry to say. And that's the kind of speed we're looking at the moment. It's going to change fundamentally. The amount of data which tells the heartbeat and when you're ready to get a heart attack, and when I see some of these things, we are too complacent. We are too complacent. Things are changing fundamentally. Healthcare is a good example, and we cannot protect it because these data, they will come if you allow or don't.
Okay.
They will come. But I have to answer the second question. Sorry, but it's woo. Yes, GE, yes, is a medium-sized company when it comes to banking. We are a midterm bank, and we are supporting what we call small and medium-sized enterprises. That's our strength. We believe that, and that's the backbone of European economy. We are in two sectors. Factoring is one of the biggest one. And yes, we do a lot of training and help them. And not only help them with financial tools, because that's the easy portion. We help them by educating them what's coming. And we share today, in our innovation centers, we share in our R&D centers, in our university, what we see as global trends in order to prepare them. And I think that's the more important part.
Okay. Thank you very much. Can I please do react to what you've heard, Mr. Kramer, but also could I ask you on this question of skills? Because when I asked at the beginning what drove your decisions on where to invest, you mentioned infrastructure first, and the second thing you mentioned was skilled workers. And you've all talked about where the skills are. In terms of, we're looking at what policymakers can do to create this better investment climate, to begin to reverse the situation. Do you think we're doing enough in terms of skills? Because this clearly is an area, education systems, training, and so on. Are we doing enough to give you the skilled people you're going to need and other companies in Europe are going to need? What more do we need to do? It's been on the agenda here for a long time, but is it delivering results?
Are we doing enough? That's your question. I'm coming from Germany, and Germany is, of course, not a very poor country, so we are quite wealthy. But I'm sure, in Germany especially, we are not doing enough for their education. We have to pay more. So I can imagine it could be the same situation or a bigger problem even in other countries in Europe. In my country, you have in the age of between 20 and 29, more than 1 million young people without any education which leads to a skilled job. Young people without university exams, without, as we have the dual system, working in the company and getting school skills in additional. More than 1 million people in this kind of age don't have any education like this, leading to a job. And that's a situation I can't accept. In a country like Germany, it is incredible that such a big number of young people don't have any specialized education for a job. And if we have this situation, and we have this situation in more than our countries and other European countries, we have to put our focus on this situation, because how we educate our young people, that's the question of the future in our country. That's the question of how are we working in 20 years. So if we want to increase our competitiveness in the whole world, we have to start with the young people to get them the opportunity to work in this global market
And
later on.
this is
So
fundamentally for
we
national
have
governments. Do you
not-
see a role for Europe?
We haven't done enough for this situation. Perhaps 20, 30 years ago, it was not such a big problem. Perhaps the globalization was not on that step than we have, like we have today. But now we have to put more money, more power into the situation of education of young people to make the future.
Thank you.
Sure.
A quick word on this skills question, if you would, and then I'd like to try and draw some conclusions before we wrap up. Do you see, if you would agree, and we're hearing even Germany, that people in Europe tend to look to Germany and say, the dual system, it works. They don't have the problems we do. But even there is a problem. Do you see, how do you think we should tackle this? And what role could Europe play, given that its powers, formal powers in this area are very limited? This is a member state matter, by and large.
No, I think that's the key point, and that's the key point for all countries, all governments, is to be sure that we have people on the very basic age, 14 years old, can start to discover skills, talents, métier, in order that progressively they have a job very quickly. And that's the first point. Then we have to address the point of the mutation of the world of the technologies. So people have to teach all life long, I would say. So we have to organize ourselves to be sure that even if you have a good skills at the beginning of your career, you keep on learn and be sure that you are going to address the mutation that we have. So it's a very important topic, and we should be more efficient on that subject. It's very true in France, by the way. We are good after the baccalaureate in France with research and universities. We are not so good, of course, as the German. We are exceptional in terms of apprenticeship systems, for instance.
Okay. Dr. Reimelt, do you see a role for Europe in this? Or
Three things. 25% of unemployment and higher in young people is a disgrace. It's a disgrace to any local government. Second, the German system is very good. I think the dual system has to be, spread out, and I think that's a masterpiece. Still can be improved, no question. Third, we all learned that the Bologna process, and I'm a teacher at university, and I can tell you, has generated, at first, not what was promised, European mobility, and second, it has generated more bureaucracy. So let's get to accountability on that.
Okay, we are nearly out of time, and I want to just try and put you all a little bit on the spot. We're going to hear from the Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker, in a little while. And one of the features of this Commission is they have talked a lot about focusing on some very core priorities. So not trying to do everything, not spreading yourself through too thinly, but they have identified 10 priorities. For each of you, and I started with you on the first question, so I will start at the other end on this one. If of all the things we've talked about the cost of doing business, we've talked about infrastructure, skills, tax pressures, regulatory environments. If you had one message for Jean-Claude Juncker when he stands here later, and Emma will be delivering those messages on your behalf, one thing you want him to do to improve the investment climate in Europe, what would your top priority be? And you have 1 minute each.
Show us that the energy market, European energy market, is real, that we execute on it, and that the say-do-can ratio will be improved, and we believe in it, and it will be executed accountable, and in a speedy manner. Second thing, we all have to vote for TTIP. These are the two messages. If we don't do these two things, we have a problem.
Again, topic of two of our panels this afternoon, so thank you very much. Mr. Gattaz.
Common vision of where we should invest in terms of infrastructures. Energy, of course, is one of the top priority. Then return investments on those infrastructures, that's for sure. And then the competitiveness ground and the trust environment that we should build together in order that we can develop our business in Europe. So a vision, first of all, infrastructure investments for the long term, and the competitiveness thanks to tax efficiency and the social regulation efficiency.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kramer, you have the last word.
We need reforms for better education, less bureaucracy, and open market. And if we do these reforms, I'm not afraid of about the future.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. And could I just say that between your priorities, you have mentioned every topic that will come up in our panels later on today. So thank you so much for a very stimulating start to our discussion. Thank you for the provocation to the policymakers. And we will discuss all these things in more detail throughout the day. Will you join me in thanking them very much indeed? Thank you so much. We are going to take a 30-minute break. Coffee is served outside. Please, when we summon you back, could you please make your way quickly into the room, because then we will hear from European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. Enjoy the break, and I'll see you in 30 minutes.